Hey everyone, welcome back to the Majesty of Reason. I'm Joe Schmid, and today I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Todd to discuss his 2021 book, The Open Future: Why Future Contingents Are All False, published with Oxford University Press. For the audience, I've linked the book in the description. So thank you, Dr. Todd, for coming on, and maybe you could tell the audience a bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, Joe. Well, first, thanks for having me on the channel today. It's super nice to be here, and thanks too for being interested in this book. Well, let's see. I'm a philosopher primarily based at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, although right now I'm talking to you from just outside Lund, Sweden, where I've got a 2-year research position in the Lund-Gothenburg Responsibility Project, which is a big project on free will and moral responsibility here in Sweden. So got 2 years of leave from Edinburgh to be here in Sweden to work on that project. But more generally, I've been interested in philosophy for a long time, did an undergrad in philosophy, went to UC Riverside to do a PhD, worked with John Martin Fisher on topics related to free will and moral responsibility. Been interested in ideas about the open future and indeterminism for a long time, and in the last few years finally was in some ways goaded to write a book about the so-called open future. And yeah, so I did that a couple years ago, and that's come out with Oxford University Press. And so I'm still very interested in the open future, and then more generally other topics having to do with free will and moral responsibility and metaphysics and ethics. So that's just a bit about me.
All right, so before we get into the discussion itself, I have two big announcements for the audience. So the first announcement is that I will be attending Princeton University beginning in fall 2023 to obtain a PhD in philosophy. So yeah, as I said, thank you. Many of you will have seen that on social media, but it's nice to include it in a video. And then the second announcement is that, and I'm going to treat this as a celebration of this milestone in my life, is that thanks to the incredibly generous support of the philosopher and patron of the channel, Mike DeVito, I will be giving away 2 physical copies of Patrick's book for free. The physical copies are with Mike, not me, but they're both going to be given away to you guys for free. The details of the giveaway, together with how to enter, will be revealed later on in this video, so definitely stay tuned until the end. And of course, many thanks to Mike DeVito for facilitating this. Much love, my dude, and you're a legend. So, okay, had to say that. Onwards we march to the thesis and key terms, like the thesis of your book and some of the key terms for the audience. So the main thesis of your book, I take it, is twofold. First, you argue that future contingents are all false, and second, you argue that this doesn't require abandoning classical logic. And in particular, you argue that it's consistent with the classical principles of bivalence and excluded middle. So can you elaborate on that core thesis of your book, and also explain what a future contingent is, what the principles of bivalence and excluded middle are, etc.?
Yeah, so nice. You got to begin at least with some terminology. So there's been this problem of future contingents for a long time, and I think that terminology traces probably back to the medievals. But roughly, I mean, you could think about future contingents in different ways, but I think the way I like to think of it is like this. So a future contingent is just a claim to the effect that something will happen when that thing's happening is not determined. That's the kind of intuitive characterization one might give. So for instance, let's say there are ways things could go from here where there's a sea battle tomorrow, and ways things could go from here where there's not a sea battle tomorrow. So it's not determined either way. Well, then the claim that there will be a sea battle tomorrow is a future contingent. And so, yeah, I mean, the topic of future contingents has been of historical interest for a long time, but yeah, that's a good, I say, first pass gloss on what a future contingent is. You also asked about bivalence and this so-called law of excluded middle. So ever since Aristotle's discussion of these topics some 2,000, well, over 2,000 years ago now, these topics have been related to or closely associated with bivalence and excluded middle. Well, what's bivalence? Basically, it's the thought that for any proposition, for any claim about how the world is, that proposition is either true or false. So there are only two truth values that a proposition could take: true, false. You could say as part of bivalence that it can't be both, but let's just say that bivalence is the view that any proposition is either true or false. Okay, and then the law of excluded middle is related, but it's this idea that any instance of a kind of schema is got to be true. It's sort of logically true. Any instance of the schema, so P or not P. Like, so if I said, Joe is in the United States or Joe is not in the United States, that looks like, one claim or its negation. So the kind of claim is for any claim, either it or its negation, if you have those together, that claim has got to be true. So those are the kind of key ideas.
Yeah, and so just to hammer home for the audience a future contingent, we use that word determined, and there might be a sense of that in ordinary parlance, and there might be a different sense that philosophers use it. So, I mean, maybe we could camp out on that just a little bit. If you could explain, I mean, as I take it, if something isn't determined, then it's not the inevitable consequence of prior conditions, something like that. And so as a result of that, because it's not the inevitable consequence of prior conditions, like all those same initial conditions could obtain, and yet that outcome or a different outcome could have obtained, despite the fact that all the same initial conditions obtained, basically.
Yeah.
So
that seems right.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything to add to that characterization?
Well, I mean, maybe the only thing that we could potentially add is this idea of the laws of nature. So sometimes people say that, determinism is the thesis that there's only one way things could go from here, which is consistent with how things are right now and the laws of nature. So it's like, fix how things are, and then fix like how the laws work and how and so on. Well, then there's only one continuation that's still in play. So that's most, I use that characterization often in the book, and I think that's widespread.
Yeah, I think, was it like Van Inwagen who said basically it was like a total state description of the universe, like how the universe is at a given time, a given past time, together with or conjoined with the laws of nature, strictly entail or strictly guarantee exactly one unique future. That's the basic thesis. So
that's it. I mean, you'll see that written a million different places in the indeterminism, free will sort of literature. It's all over the place. So,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I'm just trying to get, I know you already know this, but I'm just trying to get our audience up to speed with these technical terms. Okay. So we've gone over the main thesis of your book and some of the key terms, but I guess I just want to camp out just a little bit on like why it's desirable to give an account of the open future, which preserves or at least doesn't violate those two principles, the principles of bivalence and the law of excluded middle. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. So maybe your audience knows or doesn't know, but some philosophers, historically and presently have kind of thought, look, I mean, we want to say that the future is open in this way where, I don't know, maybe it's like there's no fact of the matter about how the world's going to be tomorrow, insofar as it's not yet determined. And some people have tried to say that what this requires is the revision of logic in some way, the revision of certain classical principles like bivalence and excluded middle. But why would it be desirable to give an account of the open future that doesn't require that? I don't really know, actually. I mean, part of the thing to say is I don't really have a lot to say in defense of bivalence and excluded middle. My main goal is a bit more defensive. I'm more concerned to show that if you were attracted to this idea of the open future, you can have that open future even with bivalence and excluded middle. So the open future gives you no reason to abandon these principles. Maybe we should abandon them for other reasons, but the open future doesn't give you any reason to give these principles up. But why maintain them in the first place? I kind of don't know. I mean, how do you justify a principle as fundamental as bivalence? I mean, it's big questions about logic and theory choice. It's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we've used this term open future or the future is open, things like that. So
Right.
can you tell us what that means, firstly? And secondly, like you distinguish between different kinds of open theism, which is going to be relevant for the conversation going forward, limited
Mhm.
foreknowledge open theism and open future open theism. So again, firstly, if you could tell us what it means for the future to be open, and secondly, if you could kind of distinguish those two kinds of open theism.
Yeah, good. So the open future, or the idea that the open future or the future is open, I think that means different things to different people. And I'm not sure that there's any one fixed meaning in the literature, nor, I mean, is there a fixed meaning to just like the intuitive sense of, oh, the future is open. I mean, there's different things we can mean. I think as a standard meaning, and the one that I tend to like, is one where the future is open just in case future contingents, as discussed above, are never true. I mean, or perhaps not determinately true, but let's just say, future contingents aren't true. They're never true. There are no true future contingents. Um, that's basically to say that the future is open. So you could say that future contingents are neither true nor false, or you could say that they're just false. Both give you an open future view because both say that future contingents are never true. Um, so yeah, that's the kind of idea. The basic idea is just, look, I mean, if it's not determined that there's going to be a sea battle tomorrow, if there could be a sea battle in some ways things could go, a sea battle and so there's not a sea battle in other ways things could go, then right now it's not true that there will be, nor is it true that there won't be a sea battle. So neither of those claims is true. That's the idea of the open future. So right. Oh yeah, two versions of open theism. So right, I mean, historically, a big driver of interest in this whole problem has been the connection between this issue and issues regarding divine omniscience and divine foreknowledge. So if you combine an open future view with theism, you get basically what I call, and what others have called, open future, open theism. I mean, it's not very complicated. It's just sort of the conjunction of the open future view together with the idea that there's some omniscient being. And so on this kind of account, no future contingents are true, and so God doesn't know future contingents, right? So if we ask God, is there going to be a sea battle tomorrow? This is, I mean, it's a little bit delicate about what to say at this point, but God would have to say, look, it's not true that there's going to be. It's not true that there's going to fail to be. I mean, it's open. So that would have to, because God is omniscient, that would have to be the point of view even of God. There is a different version of what's sometimes called open theism, and that's the limited foreknowledge view. So on this type of view, which is defended by Swinburne, Hasker, Van den Wagen, future contingents are either true or false. Some future contingents are true, but just not even God knows exhaustively which are true and which are false. So the basic idea is just that there are some truths about what's going to happen that not even an ideal knower can know. So both views agree on this much, that there are some events such that God knows neither that they will occur nor that they won't. For the limited foreknowledge person, that's a matter of God not knowing some truth, right? There's some truth here that God doesn't know. But for the open future person like myself, this will amount to God not knowing what's not there to be known.
Yeah, definitely. So just a summary for the audience. There are two versions of open theism here that we're covering. One of them is open future open theism, and the other one is limited foreknowledge open theism. Open future open theism says that there are no true future contingents. And as a result of that, God doesn't know any true future contingents, anything like that. So that's open future open theism. And then limited foreknowledge open theism says, hey, there are true future contingents, but for whatever reason, God cannot know them. Okay. Now there is this other view. I guess it's a kind of limited foreknowledge open theism, but it says that future contingent truths are there, but God can know them but God like chooses not to know them. So that's another, I guess, option in logical space, although it's nowhere near as popular as the view that God cannot know them. I just wanted to mention that for the audience. That's there in logical space, just to give people a sense of what options there are. Okay, so I do want to pause briefly to explain, or to have you explain, why open future open theism doesn't deny divine omniscience and also doesn't like seem to problematically like limit God. So yeah, I'll just turn that over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of clear that open future, open theism won't give you any kind of denial of omniscience just because, um, look, I mean, for any true claim, God is going to know that claim. I mean, just because, you and I disagree about what's true, I mean, maybe you think there are more truths than I do. That alone isn't going to amount to a difference in omniscience, right? So that's the kind of basic view. I mean, um, it seems pretty clear that the open future view is not going to amount in itself anyway to a denial of omniscience. But yeah, I mean, in terms of why, God being limited, yeah, I wouldn't think that this view would in itself imply something like that. I mean, maybe other things that like historical open theists have wanted to say might imply something like that, but this view in itself, I wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. And as I think about it, I mean, like some people argue, so here's an analogy. I mean, some people argue that um, at least some counterfactuals don't have like are gappy or they're indeterminate in truth value or whatever. So like consider the claim that if there were unicorns, then the average number of hairs on those unicorns would be even. Some people think that there's just no fact of the matter there.
Right.
um, and it'd be really weird to say to God, like, oh, since you're saying that there's no fact of the matter about that question, like, oh, I guess you're limiting God in somewhere, like God's no longer omniscient. It's like, what? I mean,
Right.
there's no fact of the there's no fact there for God to know, for him to fail to know. I mean, like, it's just the
Yeah.
nature of the counterfactual question. So it's like you're not limiting God, you're not certainly not denying his omniscience. You're saying that for every true, determinately true claim, God knows that claim and knows it infallibly. It's just here we have a claim which is just not determinately true at all, just by the nature of the claim or by the nature of the claim's relation to reality or whatever. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a good example here is fiction, I think. So, suppose as it were, I get to heaven and I'm like, God, tell me, what was Harry Potter wearing the day he first met, Hermione? I mean, or did he put on his left shoe first or his right shoe the day he first met Hermione? I mean, and God's like, there's nothing to say here. I'm like, I thought you were supposed to be omniscient. That's a weird thing to say. It's like, well, look, I mean, there's no fact of the matter about things like that. I mean, that's what we're saying about the future. Of course, that might be wrong. That might be a wrong view about the future. But the place to disagree here is about the view about the future, not the view about omniscience.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on, we've got this overarching problem, this problem of future contingents. So can you kind of give us a bird's eye view of, well, firstly, what this problem is, but also like the three separate problems here, which will kind of be our focus for the rest of the video, and I'll just break it down topically into the grounding problem, firstly, the logical problem, secondly, and the practical problem, thirdly. So yeah, what's the problem of future contingents, and then maybe give us a bird's eye view of those three problems.
Yeah, so I mean, the problem of future contingents has been around for a long time, and I view my book as organized around the resolution of this problem. Um, I mean, roughly, I think the problem of future contingents is the problem of addressing these three different problems. I mean, so you've got this so-called grounding problem, and this is in some ways what's primarily maybe supposed to motivate an open future view. So the grounding problem is that, look, I mean, let's assume that in some sense the future isn't real. Maybe more on that in a bit. Let's assume that the future isn't real. Okay, if the future is not real, then what accounts for the truth of future contingents? Assuming that there are future contingents, i.e., assuming that determinism is false. So if there are ways things could go from here where there's a sea battle tomorrow, and ways things could go from here where there's no sea battle tomorrow, what could explain why it's true that there will be a sea battle tomorrow, or vice versa, that there won't be a sea battle tomorrow. I mean, where would this truth come from, so to speak? It wouldn't come from the future, nor would it come from deterministic causes in the present. So, where is this truth coming from, basically? That's the grounding problem. And that's kind of supposed to motivate the open future idea. Okay, but now you have two further problems, the logical problem and certain practical problems. And these in some ways push back against the open future view. So the logical problem is like something like, well, look, I mean, if you think that future contingents aren't true, what are they then? Neither true nor false? Are they all false? But how could that be? I mean, isn't this in conflict with logic, basically? Doesn't logic tell us otherwise? I mean, so more or less the logical problem is, what's up with bivalence in the law of excluded middle? I mean, how are you open futurists going to solve that? Isn't that weird? Okay, then the practical problems, I mean, there's no easy summary. I mean, there's some practical problems that people have raised for the open future view having to do with betting and assertion and stuff like that. So there's a further challenge for the open futurists of trying to address these practical problems with the view. And so my book tries to motivate the grounding problem, say, this gives us some reason to think that the future is open, and then it tries to address the logical problem and the practical problems.
Awesome. Awesome. So let's just go through each of these three problems in order. And so then that will just take us to the end of the video. So yeah, the first is the grounding problem, as you say. So you take for granted two substantive theses that are necessary for the grounding problem to get up and running. And for the audience, don't worry, we'll discuss the grounding problem in a second. We just need to talk about these substantive theses that are taken for granted first. Okay, so what are those substantive theses? First one is no futurism, which is basically the disjunction of presentism or growing block theory on the one hand. And then your second thesis is causal indeterminism on the other hand. So can you define these for us? So what are these substantive theses?
So a second ago, I was kind of saying, look, given that the future is not real, and given that determinism is false, well, what is this idea that the future is not real? I mean, you've got a couple different views about what's sometimes called the structure of time or the ontology of time. You could be a presentist and say that there's only present objects exist. You could be a growing block theorist and say that past objects exist and present objects. Or you could be what's sometimes called an eternalist and say that past, present, and future objects are all equally exist. They're all kind of ontologically on a par. Just like, what's going on in Australia is ontologically on a par as what's going on in Sweden. So, okay, I mean, the main idea is that in order to get any kind of open future view going, in my opinion, you got to assume the denial of eternalism. You got to have either a presentist view or a growing block view. So you can't kind of think that the future is just as real as present and past. The second thing is just what we were discussing earlier. This problem is really only going to get going if you are an indeterminist.
All right. So we've gotten those key theses down, and now we can get on to what is the grounding problem. And let's focus in particular on the the future in particular grounding problem that you defend, rather than like the truth in general one. So for the audience, don't worry about that distinction. But so what is the grounding problem, and how does it constitute an argument for the conclusion that future contingents fail to be true?
Yeah, good. I mean, I hate to be a bit of a disappointment to you and your audience, but my sense is that it's kind of hard to motivate the grounding problem. And at some level, I don't think that a whole lot can be said to motivate it. I try to do my best in the first chapter of my book. But I mean, very quickly anyway, the problem is something like this. I just have this feeling that truths about the future should be derivative in some key way. So I mean, if we go back to that thought that I was motivating earlier, it's like, look, there are ways things could go where there's a sea battle tomorrow, ways things could go where there isn't. Okay, now why would it be true that there will be a sea battle tomorrow? Like, as it were, where would that truth come from? I mean, I know that that's like not a super technical, locution or super clear, but the idea is, again, like, where would it come from? Not from the future objects themselves, because the future doesn't exist, and not from the present causes. So it seems to like float free in some weird way, or be unexplained in some weird way. If we focus on just that second thing, I guess the idea is like the truth seems arbitrary. Like what would explain why it's true that there will be, rather than that there won't be. Now, I crucially don't say that like this holds for any truth whatsoever, that any truth whatsoever, has this type of explanation. It just seems plausible to me for the case of the future. And of course, you could press on that, like, what's so special about the future? And fair question, but that's my feeling.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, it seems as though the driving idea is like arbitrariness or inexplicability considerations. And, these like legitimate appeals in the rest of philosophy. I know Michael Della Rocca points out that like in one of his papers on the PSR that there are these things called like explicability arguments. And oftentimes philosophers will object to other views on the basis of their rendering something utterly inexplicable or just totally mysterious. So, you'll hear people like object to, for instance, like emergentist substance dualism on the basis of like arguably it would just be arbitrary or inexplicable for like these third person neurophysiological goings on to somehow like produce magically this like immaterial ghostly substance or whatever. Anyway, we don't need to get bogged down to the mind body problem or anything like that. But my point is just that broader in philosophy, there are these appeals to arbitrariness and inexplicability. And if you can show that your opponent's view kind of lands in arbitrariness or inexplicability somewhere, that might be a significant mark against their view. So, yeah. And so then your guiding idea is that if there were future contingents, basically, it would just like why? Why would it be the case, right? Like, why would it be true that right now that there will be a sea battle tomorrow when everything about the present state of the universe together with the laws are entirely compatible with it being a real possibility that the future battle doesn't happen? Like it's just inexplicable, and you can't appeal to anything about the future either because they're not even there yet, given your assumption of no futurism, right? So there's no facts about the future to settle it. There's nothing about the present that could settle it. It just seems arbitrary then if it's true one way as opposed to the other. Like it's
you've done me a good service there. I think that was very well done. I mean, and I mean the Della Rocca comparison is quite interesting. I heard him give probably that talk that you're referring to years ago, and I mean we could think about other cases too, like certain cases of like in the personal identity literature. This is one of his cases too. It seems arbitrary to just say like this guy, like we've got two identical. Well, we've got someone who we split the brain, and then we've got lefty and righty, and they both have, in some sense, equal claim on being, the successor of, say, Jones or whatever. Why would it be just that, he survives as Jones or as like the guy on the lefty but not righty? It's like that would be arbitrary. So people reject those kinds of views, and so, I mean, you could say my rejection's a little bit similar to that. But the comparison there is super interesting.
Yeah, I like that particular example because it's like if there's an equal claim on both of them, it like it would just like imagine someone came along and is like, oh yeah, it's definitely lefty. He's definitely gonna be the left one. It's like, why? Why left? I mean, it's like it could easily it's like there's this resistance.
Or even better, it's just, I mean, if you think of someone coming back, it's like, look, we just don't know. We just don't know which, person he survived as, lefty or righty. It's either lefty or it's righty. We just can't say. It's like, you kind of think, no, that seems weird. I mean, what could explain why he would be lefty rather than righty, or righty rather than lefty? Since there's nothing that could explain that, we should just deny that this is a case. I mean, we should deny some aspect of the setup here, but I think that's right.
That's good. Okay, so far, like, let's suppose that this argument succeeds. I'm gonna go and develop some criticisms of it later, but let's suppose that it succeeds. It seems though it only established that future contingents are untrue. That is, yeah, they're not true. How then do you connect that with how do you connect their untruth to their falsity? So, because
Yeah.
you want to argue that all future contingents are false. So,
Yeah, good. I mean, the grounding problem, that's right. It just motivates this idea that, future contingents aren't true. How then do you get from not true to false? Fair question. I mean, I don't think that there's any easy, straightforward answer here. And in fact, I mean, my answer is really going to be a long-winded tour through a bunch of, my book. But I mean, maybe the first pass answer is just that, I mean, look, for most claims, like usually, if someone can show that that claim's not true, we then think, that person's shown that it's false. I mean, usually we don't insist on a gap between the untrue and the false. I mean, maybe, in certain cases, people talk you into that kind of gap, the liar paradox or, vagueness or this or that. I mean, there are confusing things out there, but usually, we just think, yeah, it's not true, so it's false. And I think there's no reason not to do that here. There's no reason not to say, look, I mean, these future contingents aren't true, so they're false. That's it. I mean, and then I kind of like, well, why not say that? And then I try to say, well, actually, there's no reason not to say that. Like, objections to just saying that are, addressable. So the second, thing to say is, yeah, I mean, some semantic ideas about will, and maybe we'll get to that later, or that can come up as we go along.
yeah, definitely. We're definitely going to get to like the neg-raising stuff and universal quantification stuff. So, okay. Now, though, is objection time. So, objections to this grounding problem or the grounding argument sort of that you develop. So, the first one is what we might call the symmetry problem. So, one might think that there's like a similar grounding problem for the presentist regarding past truths, or more specifically, truths about the past that can't be retrodicted from the present together with causal law. That is past contingent. So, we're talking here about past contingent truths. So, truths about the past that are basically not like determined, as it were, by facts about the present together with causal law. So just as we were focusing earlier on facts about the future that weren't determined by facts about the present together with causal law, and we called those future contingents, we could equally focus on past contingents, facts about the past that can't be deterministically retrodicted or that aren't even determined at all from the present together with causal law.
Yeah.
And let's call those past contingents. So the question then is, wouldn't it be equally arbitrary or brute for the presentist if there were past contingent truths, right? So just as we've argued that it's brute or arbitrary or inexplicable for there to be future contingent truths, it would seem as though there being past contingent truths is equally arbitrary or brute or inexplicable. And so the idea is that if we accept your argument and we go for the untruth or the falsity of these future contingents, we should also go with the untruth or the falsity of these past contingents. But, so the thought goes, surely that's absurd. We do not want to adopt an open past view. Intuitively, the past is fixed. It's over and done with. All facts about the past intuitively are kind of they're just there. They're done and over with, and they're all there. They're determinately true, or they're determinately true. That's the idea. So, yeah, anyway, how do you respond to that worry, the symmetry problem?
Yeah, good. To my mind, this is a key focus of chapter 1 in my book. I think this problem's really not been taken seriously enough by a lot of open futurists. So people have not really taken seriously enough the concern that their arguments for an open future would also give them an open past. Now, one way out of this problem immediately is to adopt what's sometimes called the growing block view. So, on that type of view, past and present are real, but future isn't. For various reasons, I don't like the growing block view.
Yeah,
I mean,
so if I could interrupt, I basically want to explain to the audience why basically adopting growing block can help get around that. The basic idea is that the facts, like the past, is there. So there's a reality there that can basically correspond to and explain or ground these past contingents, these past contingent claims, whether they're true or false or what have you. So basically, in setting up the problem, I assumed presentism, because in that way, there aren't any past things, right? They don't exist, and so you can't appeal to those past things to explain past contingent truths. And then you go on to say, well, then also because they're past contingents, they can neither be explained by, like, you can't appeal to facts about the present together with causal law because they're past contingent truths. They're not determinist. They're not determined by the present together with laws. They're not able to be deterministically retrodicted. But if you do, in fact, bring in the reality of these things, if there's an existent portion of the world there, then yeah, I mean, it's not difficult to see how you could like ground or account for there being these past contingent truths, because like the reality's there, like the sea battle that happened 1,000 years ago, which that's there, right? That can ground or explain the truth. So anyway, I just wanted to pause for the audience and explain that, and you could add to that if you want.
Yeah, no, all that seemed quite right to me. But I've never liked the growing block view, so I kind of set that aside and just assume for the sake of argument presentism. Right. So, I mean, what's my response to this idea that, well, presentism is together with indeterminism is just going to give you brute facts about arbitrary facts about the past. I say, yeah, that's basically right. I mean, my response is that bruteness and arbitrariness of this kind are okay for the past, but not for the future. So this is a bit of special pleading, basically. I think. I mean, my sense is that, yeah. I mean, you're right. Like, let's just take a given past contingent, say that there was a sea battle yesterday. Okay, now let's just freeze frame the current state of the universe. Like some super comprehending, divine being, like just gets a freeze frame of the current state of things. It knows the laws of nature. I mean, the kind of thought is like that being wouldn't be able to sit, like retrodict, oh, there was a sea battle yesterday. Nor would that being be able to retrodict, oh, there wasn't a sea battle yesterday. It was yesterday that there's no sea battle. Like this being wouldn't be able to do it. They'd be like, I can't say. So, okay, so in this kind of case, this would be a past contingent. All I have to say here is like, yeah, I mean, some one of these claims is true. Maybe we don't know which, but in a certain sense, it's totally arbitrary which one is true. In a certain sense of arbitrariness, at least, it is arbitrary, but that's okay. We can accept this kind of arbitrariness vis-a-vis the past, but look, I mean, the idea that we can, just because we can accept this type of arbitrariness in one case doesn't imply that we can accept this kind of arbitrariness in any other case. So that's my strategy. It's just like, yeah, I mean, the future is different from the past. It seems like we shouldn't accept it in the case of the future, or in the case of like fictions, we shouldn't just accept that there's just, it's just arbitrary, like there's some fact about whether Harry put on his left shoe first or his right. We just shouldn't accept that. So yeah, it's a bit of special pleading, but maybe not unprincipled special pleading.
Yeah, and you try to kind of deliver the principle, as it were. Like you seem to appeal to like the more fundamental asymmetry, which is kind of causal explanatory with respect to like going from the past to the future, which basically everyone accepts. So if you could just say a little bit more about that, how that kind of at least helps to mitigate the force of the arbitrariness, maybe.
Yeah, soften the blow slightly.
Yeah.
I mean, the kind of idea to which I appeal is that it's like, look, truths about the future seem to be sensitive, in some sense of sensitive, to what the present is like and what's going on right now. Whereas truths about the past seem not to be. And here I appeal to some like a thought experiment involving, imagining everything going out of existence. Maybe you think that's impossible. It might be. I mean, I kind of don't know. One of many things I don't know, but at any rate, it seems like it's an intelligible thought. I mean, imagine everything goes out of existence. Okay. But first, let's just say, like, suppose right now it's true that in 200 years from today, there's going to be a sea battle. Okay, it's not like that truth would still be true, even if just like all of a sudden everything were to go out of existence. Like if everything were to go out of existence, it's not like it could still be true that there's going to be a sea battle in 200 years. I mean, that couldn't happen. On the other hand, truths about the past, I claim, would remain truths about the past, even if everything were to go out of existence. So if everything went out of existence in the next couple minutes, it would still be true that there was a sea battle on a given day 200 years ago. So these truths about the past kind of like, they don't care what happens to the present. Truths about the future do. And so in this kind of way, you could see that truths about the future are in some sense causally or explanatorily dependent on what's going on now, whereas past truths aren't. That I think helps the claim to go down a little bit. It's kind of like you can see that truths about the past are brute or arbitrary in this kind of way just by the observation that like they'd just be what they were even if everything went out of existence. Like if everything on that like could possibly ground one of these truths were just to disappear, like they just still be there. So to me that indicates that they're at some level they're just brute truths now. Like truths about the past, they're just like brute, they're just there, not explained by anything anymore.
Yeah. Okay, so as always, much more can be said both back and forth on each of these objections, but for the sake of time, we're going to go on to the second objection. So the first objection was that symmetry problem. The second one is appealing to future-directed properties. So the idea is that perhaps we can appeal to these future-directed properties had by presently existing things to serve as grounds for these future contingent truths. So for example, maybe the property of being something that will be G for some property G. Like maybe that's like a future directed property. It's a property that something currently has, but it's like directed towards the future, like being such that something will be G, or like being such that I will engage in a sea battle tomorrow or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that allows us, so the objection goes, to preserve presentism.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to say like there really do exist these future objects or what have you, because these are only properties held by presently existing things. We're only appealing to presently existing things. And it also allows us to preserve future contingent truths, because now we have an explanation for why it will be the case that something occurs, some future contingent occurs in the future. So, yeah, and we don't have any arbitrariness because we have an explanation in terms of these future directed properties. So the future contingent truths are grounded. So what do you make of this proposal?
Yeah, so this is a nice presentation of what's sometimes called Lucretianism in the philosophy of time. Lucretius being the Stoic philosopher, or was he an Epicurean? No, I don't remember. Well, Lucretius had this idea about, well, anyway, had an idea that inspired what's called Lucretianism. Yeah, and you appeal to these sort of maybe properties that the world has, like going to include a sea battle. Okay, I mean, my short answer here is just that I think that this type of view doesn't really get around the arbitrariness worry. It just locates it in a different place. So like, let's just take our sea battle example. My question now is, why does the world have the property being going to include a sea battle when, look, everything about current reality and the stuff that kind of explains why things happen and why things don't happen, when all of that is just as consistent with it's having the alternative property being going to include no sea battle. Like, there's no answer there. There's just we've just located the arbitrariness in a different place. So I think that there may or may not be these properties, but I think that their existence doesn't really help with the type of arbitrariness that I'm motivated by.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's not dwell on that objection a little bit further. It's probably not my favored response. So let's go on to the next response, which is from abstracta, or appealing to abstract objects. So the idea here is perhaps we can appeal to abstracta and their properties. For example, like abstract states of affairs, having the property will concretely obtain to serve as grounds for these future contingent truths. So again, we're looking for grounds or some kind of explanation, something to remove the arbitrariness for affirming their affirming future contingent truths. And again, the idea here is that we appeal to, like, maybe there are these things called abstract states of affairs, and these states of affairs, some of them concretely obtain, and some of them have the property of basically being such that they will concretely obtain. So like the previous proposal, that basically allows us to preserve presentism, because these states of affairs don't like exist in the future or anything like that. I mean, maybe they're just like non-spatiotemporal or something like that. And it also allows us to preserve future contingent truths without arbitrariness, because we have an explanation in terms of the properties of states of affairs. So what do you think about this proposal?
It's interesting. It's sort of reminiscent of a proposal by Tom Crisp in Presentism and Grounding, a paper in Use a while ago. But yeah, I think I want to say the same thing as I said before, that this just locates the arbitrariness in a different place. So again, like take the state of affairs, there's a sea battle at time t, or so, well, let's just call that a state of affairs, a sea battle at t. Well, why does that state of affairs have the property of being going to concretely obtain, or will concretely obtain? Like, why doesn't the alternative state of affairs have the property being such that it will obtain? So again, no answer there, and maybe like a no answer, there is respectable, but I think that ultimately, I mean, there is no answer there, and so my arbitrariness worry is just unaddressed.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I feel like to the extent that we were mystified at the original question, to the same extent we'll be mystified at this at this new question of, well, okay, cool, you've appealed to these future directed properties, or maybe properties of abstracta. But like, to the extent that I was mystified originally, or to the extent that I found it arbitrary originally, to the same extent I'm going to be mystified at this next question of why the states of affairs have this future directed or why the present things have the future directed property, or why the abstract states of affairs have this property of like will obtain or something like that, will concretely obtain. It just, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to make any kind of explanatory headway, to be honest. Like, the same problem is as pressing as before, and so we haven't really illuminated things, it seems to me. Or to the extent that we have, we've just, like, as you put it, just totally relocated the mystification rather than removed it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, maybe I'll just leave that there, because I think I'm on
okay. Yeah. Okay. So the next objection is an appeal to competing intuitions. So your case for the untruth of future contingents depends on this intuition about the future in particular that we've been talking about. But if we follow your argument out, we see that the result of this intuition, holding fixed your background assumptions of like no futurism and causal indeterminism, the result of following that intuition to its logical conclusion is that for any future contingent P, it is false that either it will be the case that P or it will not be the case that P. But many people, like myself, have the intuition that for at least some future contingent Q, either it will be the case that Q, or it will not be the case that Q. For example, either I will eat breakfast tomorrow, or I will not eat breakfast tomorrow. That seems really plausible to me. And equivalently, it seems really plausible to me that if it's false that I will eat breakfast tomorrow, then I will not eat breakfast tomorrow. I'll instead be skipping breakfast. That's kind of my intuitive reaction to this case. So we seem to have a clash of intuitions here. The intuition that you highlight implies, together with those background assumptions, the falsity of the intuition that I just highlighted. And likewise, of course, the intuition that I just highlighted implies the falsity of the intuition that you highlighted, again, holding fixed those background assumptions. So given this conflict of intuitions, I guess my question is, why should we privilege the intuition you highlight over the intuition that I highlight?
Yeah, good. I mean, short answer, I think because I can undermine your intuition, or so. I mean, that's the project.
Yeah.
But you can't undermine my intuition. I mean, they're very different intuitions, mind you. I mean, the kind of intuition that I'm having is, one against this kind of like bruteness or arbitrariness that seems very like metaphysically loaded. It seems like, a metaphysical judgment of some kind. Your intuition is instead like semantic. It's like meaning based. It's like it's kind of a reaction like, wait, that sounded funny. I mean, what do you mean? Like that sounded like a contradiction. So I mean, your principle is, if it's false that I'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning, then I won't eat breakfast tomorrow morning. And I, of course, have to deny that inference. And so you're like, what? Wait, what's up with that? That didn't sound right. And then, yeah, so now I want to come along and say, yeah, I mean, I know why that inference seemed really good to you, but actually you have to be super careful about inferences in semantics and logic. And once you think about that one a little bit more carefully, you're going to see that it's not semantically valid. Well, we'll just leave it there. It's in the end, it's not valid. And so I'm going to try to kind of undermine your confidence in this judgment that if it's false that it will, then it won't. That does sound supernatural, and I kind of sympathize. It's not for no reason that basically not many people at all have ever tried to defend the view that I'm defending. It's because of that reaction that you just had. But I think that if you massage that in the right way, then we can see why it's not quite right.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit further when we get to the neg-raising thing, because you might just say like, well, Joe, actually, really, what is accounting for your intuition here is the plausibility of if it's false that I will eat breakfast tomorrow, then it is not the case that I will eat breakfast tomorrow. And like you grant that, right? Like
Yeah,
you could totally grant that, but you don't then get to kind of invert those scope, or you invert the scope of those quantifiers. It will be the case that, and the not, the negation. I had the wide scope not. I had it is not the case that it will be that tomorrow I eat breakfast.
yeah,
Or eat cereal for breakfast. Whereas in the inferences, I was just presenting it in my objection. I kind of had those inverted. I said it will be the case that it is not the case that I eat breakfast. So like it will be tomorrow that I don't eat breakfast.
yeah.
And you might be able to account for I might ultimately be skeptical of that, but you might be able to account for my intuition by saying, well, you're kind of just doing this kind of subtle implicit neg-raising here, Joe. And for the audience, we'll talk about what neg-raising is later. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of highlight that and how it relates to what we're going to be talking about in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of project is at this point is like roughly a philosophy of language sort of semantics project, and it's one where I'm going to want to say, look, I mean, human beings are often not so good about processing what's sometimes called scope, and like we make mistakes, and yeah, I mean, it's more complicated than that, but we'll perhaps get there.
Yeah, for the audience, we will talk about scope and quantification and neg-raising later on, and we'll break those down, and it'll be understandable. I promise, or at least I hope. Okay, so the next objection, and I think this is the penultimate objection to your kind of grounding style argument, and it's a kind of Moorean shift. So for the audience, like G.E. Moore was a 20th century philosopher who, when contemplating the famous skeptical argument / arguments for the conclusion that we don't know that there's an external world, famously argued basically as follows: here's one hand, here's another. Hands are external world objects. If there are external world objects, then there's an external world. And moreover, I know that I have hands, and I know that if I have hands, then I know that there's an external world, etc. So you basically defeat the skeptic by appealing to something that just seems really obvious. And the basic idea is that the skeptic has these highfalutin theoretical premises leading to a really, really, really implausible conclusion. And G. Moore comes along and will just says, well, hey, that conclusion is super duper implausible. So I'm just going to say that that conclusion is false, and that's a really, really, really plausible premise. And so your argument must have gone wrong somewhere. So you basically perform a modus tollens, where the skeptic performs a modus ponens. And that's where you get the kind of saying, one's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. I actually have a shirt that says that. And I've sometimes learned on my channel this for people in my audience. Okay, anyway. So this is similar to the previous objection, and the basic idea is that we have an inconsistency among three reasonably plausible claims holding fixed those background assumptions of causal indeterminism and no futurism. Okay, so here are those three inconsistent claims, which each of which might strike one as reasonably plausible. The first claim is that future truths require a ground of the sort that you specify. The second claim is that neither future-directed properties, nor abstract objects, nor anything else adequately satisfies the grounding requirement specified in that first claim. And then the third claim is that I'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning. Okay, you urge us to affirm the conjunction of 1 and 2, those first two claims, and reject that third claim. My worry, though, is that, at least to me, that third claim is much more plausible than the conjunction of those first two claims. Like, it seems much more plausible to me that I'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning than is the conjunction of, that seems more plausible to me than the conjunction of, hey, future truths
Right.
require a ground of the sort that you specify, and also nothing that's like presentistically acceptable could satisfy that grounding requirement. So, I mean, after all, those first two claims are highly theoretical claims contested by many philosophers, whereas that third claim seems like a humdrum, innocuous piece of common sense that isn't as contested among philosophers. And also, my personal body of evidence seems to very strongly support that third claim in a way that 1 and 2 aren't comparably supported. Like the support for 3 extends well beyond intuition and introspection, and into things like induction. Like I know all my past mornings for like years have been, I've eaten breakfast. I usually don't skip it. I have very deep-seated values for breakfast and so on. Uh, so
Sure.
anyway, my point is just that whenever we have a collection of inconsistent claims, I think we should reject the least plausible among them. And
Yeah.
since that third claim is more plausible to me than the conjunction of 1 and 2, I suggest rejecting the conjunction of 1 and 2. So basically saying, hey, at least one of those is false, even if I can't pinpoint precisely which. At least one of those is false, and preserving that third claim, rather than like affirming the conjunction and consequently rejecting that third claim. So, yeah, and that's basically a problem for the argument, because your argument recommends the opposite, right? So, I mean, what do you make of that kind of criticism?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I want to say is I don't want to reject the claim that you'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning, Joe. I mean, um, I, I don't know whether that's a future contingent. You know, I've got no idea whether that's a future contingent. I mean, maybe it's not. I mean, maybe things are right now are such that it's determined that, Joe has breakfast tomorrow morning. That doesn't strike me as outlandish given the things you've said about your past and, your values and everything else. So yeah, I don't really want to reject that claim. I mean, um, so maybe I'll let you, say something back to that.
I was just thinking, like, okay, for the purposes of the example, let's stipulate that it really is, or something like. I mean, I feel like, I mean, I could die tonight, like, uh,
Okay.
yeah, like I could get in a
Not,
car
not
crash later today, or I
you get
could.
in a
I mean, I
car
feel like
crash. You could
that seems
die.
like eminently plausible.
No,
Listen, I
those are
grant
just
that.
epistemic possibilities. Those are like
Yeah,
you think those are real, like in the world objective possibilities. Like there are continuations of the current moment where later tonight you die in a car crash, or later tonight maybe some less morbid stuff happens so that you don't get breakfast tomorrow morning, like a flood in your apartment or house or whatever. Um,
yeah. So I actually don't want to commit myself to these overarching claims about like the causal structure of reality and how it like flows.
uh,
I do kind of want to only commit to the epistemic possibility, but here's something that I think I could bolster just with the epistemic case. I could basically say that if we accepted your view, then
uh,
my credence would have to sort of be, it had to be distributed in a way in which it seems really implausible that and which in fact I don't distribute it. So basically, like, even though I have these very live epistemic possibilities where either, well, I guess it's not very live that I get in a car crash, but like very live possibilities where somehow I skip breakfast tomorrow, or like I have a non-negligible credence in these various things. But you know what I don't have a non-negligible credence in is that I will eat breakfast tomorrow morning. So your view would seem to require me to have those credences match up in a way that seems really implausible, and which they aren't in fact matched up. Like I'm just much, much, much more confident uh, in my eating breakfast tomorrow morning, which I shouldn't be if there are like these things that I have like some reasonable degree of confidence that might happen to kind of bring it off course. So basically, like you get the epistemic probabilities wrong. That would be the objection then.
well, this is all a bit complicated, but I'd say that, um, look, I mean, I don't want to be a kind of garden variety skeptic. So, like, as regards the past, like, like, I'm not interested in saying, well, look, like, how do you know that you're, like, I don't know, suppose you think, like, yesterday I met up with my friend, like, Tom, and like we had lunch at, you know, Jake's or something. Okay, well, uh, how do you know that, like, you weren't, deceived in the meantime? Or how do you know that, like, your memory hasn't, like, deceived you in the last, little while, so that that memory is unreliable? Or so, I mean, that's a hard question, but I'm not interested in doing that. And similarly, I'm not trying to say that, like, you know, look, I mean, how do you know you won't get in a car crash? That, like, how do you know you won't get, yeah, like, how do you know your flat won't flood and stuff like that? Those are just raising just like garden variety epistemic, possibilities that in usual contexts we can ignore. Um, okay, but right, I mean, it could still, like so long as it's in fact determined that you have breakfast tomorrow morning, as far as I'm concerned, maybe you do know that, despite the fact that there are those, epistemic possibilities floating around. I mean, so it's no, my view wouldn't prohibit that,
Yeah,
because it's
so
true, and you can properly ignore those possibilities. But
yeah, so I guess my point wasn't so much about whether I can know it in light of the fact that there are these epistemic possibilities. Rather, my point was about kind of rationally appropriate credences. So if A entails B, then B is at least as probable as A. So let's treat probabilities as rational credences. So yeah, if A entails B, then the rational credence in B is greater than or equal to A. Now, I have some degree of credence, let's suppose, and rational credence. Let's say it's like um, zero point 0.1. Let's make these easy numbers. 0.1 that something happens between right now and tomorrow, which kind of uh, makes it such that like I either don't have the usual serial that I have, or maybe I get in a car crash or something like that. So something like that happens between now and tomorrow that kind of prevents it, and that entails that I won't uh, eat breakfast tomorrow morning. And so then if I have a 0.1 in these things happening, then my credence that I'm not going to eat breakfast tomorrow has to be 0.1 or greater. But then my credence that I will eat breakfast tomorrow morning has to be it can't be greater than 0.9, right? Because that's incompatible with this other thing that I just concluded has to have a 0.1 or greater credence. So my probability that I will eat breakfast tomorrow morning can't be 0.9 or can't be greater than 0.9. But here's the thing. It is greater than 0.9. It seems rational for me to have greater than 0.9 given all my evidence and so on. And so that would basically that's what I'm thinking. I mean, is that just like a straightforward inconsistency in my credences, or is this a problem for your view? I guess that's what I'm thinking now.
Well, I mean, maybe let's pause for a second and say this, that, I mean, I think a lot of the worries that you're raising here are orthogonal to the open future issue. Like,
Yeah.
so I mean, like, knowledge of the future is just like super difficult and contested, apart from like weird views like mine where there are no future contingents, or even they're all false. So, I mean, one kind of crucial issue is just that, like, well, look, I mean, you've been saying, like, I have some like non-negligible credence in the idea that, maybe something like, I don't know, I could get in a car crash or something, or my apartment could flood. Things like that have happened before. Like, how do I know they're not going to happen again? Well, I mean, do you, set aside the whole open future business? Can you grant that and then still say, but look, I know that I'm going to have breakfast tomorrow morning? Like, to my ear, that does sound a little bit weird. It sounds like saying, like, yeah, I mean, this has happened a bunch before, but I know it's not going to happen again. Like, well, how do you know that? So, where my view kind of presents a special problem is that it's going to imply that, look, no future contingent is true, so no future contingent is knowable. And if you thought that, like, look, that Joe will eat breakfast for, tomorrow morning, is a future contingent, then it's going to imply that Joe doesn't know that. But like, if we're like third parties kind of looking in on Joe, and like, I don't know, like like you might think, yeah, Joe totally knows that he's going to have breakfast tomorrow morning, just as he always does. But Patrick over here has to deny that Joe knows that, because there's some like small objective chance that he doesn't, and that looks bad for me.
Yeah, that was good. That's sort of, I guess that's the best way to put it. As I'm thinking further and reflecting on the way that I just put it in terms of credence, I think that was just a straightforward, inconsistent set of credences that I described. So I think that wouldn't pose a challenge to your view. I mean, it gets difficult because like the entailment relations between the it will be the case that not versus it's not the case that it will. I'd have to sit down and really formally work that out, which I'll probably do after this. So I will come to a resolution in my own mind. All right. Hey all, Joe here. Who else? I was able to sit down and clarify the credence-based objection that I was inchoately articulating, or at least trying to articulate in the discussion. I don't include this brief interruption to your ordinary majesty of reason programming to post facto dunk on Dr. Todd. That's not what I'm doing. Instead, I include it for pedagogical purposes. It'll basically help you guys think through these things more clearly and cogently. So here then is the clarified, precisified, credence-based objection. So for starters, it seems rational to have a reasonably high credence in the claim that it's really possible for something to happen between now and tomorrow morning that results in my not eating breakfast, and also it's really possible for such a thing not to happen. For a conservative estimate, let's let that rational credence be 0.5 or 50%. Now, if A entails B, then the probability of B, understood as the rational credence an agent should have in B, must be greater than or equal to the probability of A. But the aforementioned claim, the rational credence in which is 0.5, entails the claim that my eating breakfast tomorrow is a future contingent. So the rational credence that my eating breakfast tomorrow is a future contingent is greater than or equal to 0.5. But under Dr. Todd's view, P being a future contingent entails that P is false, and hence Dr. Todd's view would imply that the rational credence that it's false that I'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning is greater than or equal to 0.5, right? We just concluded earlier that the rational credence that my eating breakfast tomorrow morning is a future contingent is itself greater than or equal to 0.5, and under Dr. Todd's view, that claim that my eating breakfast tomorrow is a future contingent, that would entail that my eating breakfast tomorrow is false. So my eating breakfast tomorrow, or the claim that I will eat breakfast tomorrow, the falsity of that has to be greater than or equal to 0.5, because the falsity of that is entailed by something whose probability is itself greater than or equal to 0.5. But since the falsity of I'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning is incompatible with the claim that I'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning, and since the rational credence in the former is at least 0.5, the rational credence in the latter must then be strictly less than 0.5. In other words, Dr. Todd's view entails that the rational credence in the claim that I'll eat breakfast tomorrow morning is less than 0.5. But that's really implausible to me. Not only is my actual credence much greater than that, right? My actual credence is definitely greater than something like 0.9, but also my actual credence is very plausibly eminently justified and eminently rational, especially in light of my knowledge of myself, my past decisions, and so on. So this, really, is the problem for Dr. Todd's view that I was gesturing towards in the live discussion. In short, his view entails the irrationality of a certain credence distribution that really seems rational, or at least it really seems that way to me. And that credence distribution, by the way, is basically assigning a 0.5 credence to the claim that my eating breakfast tomorrow is a future contingent, while simultaneously assigning a credence of greater than 0.5 to the claim that I will eat breakfast tomorrow. Granted, at this point, Dr. Todd is almost certainly just going to say, well, no, it just falls out of my view that that's not a rational credence distribution. So what's your objection, Joe? But my objection is, yeah, that does fall out of his view, but that's a really implausible consequence by my lights. And so at least for the people who share my plausibility structures there, this gives them at least some weight of a reason to think that Dr. Todd's view is false. Obviously, I don't claim that this is knocked down. Obviously, it depends on your position on the grand epistemic landscape, etc., right? But anyway, I just wanted to include this again for pedagogical purposes. This is not to dunk on Dr. Todd. I'm sure Dr. Todd could dunk on me. Okay. Now, the way that you just put it, would basically be the next step in the dialectic for me. I'd be like, okay, set aside all that credence stuff and let's just focus on the claim. It is a future contingent that tomorrow I'll eat breakfast, and I know that tomorrow I'll eat breakfast. Still, that conjunction seems to me more plausible than those first two claims. The claim that future contingents require ground of the sort that you specify, and the claim that nothing that's presentistically acceptable could satisfy that grounding requirement. And so now we do have a straightforward inconsistency, and we avoid that problem. If we don't like the breakfast case, we can pick something else. So, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think I just say, I know that. I mean, first of all, the argument seems a little bit question begging to me. I mean, that's not super helpful, but I kind of think, look, I mean, I've kind of given you this reason to think that, like, you know, a truth here would be arbitrary. You know, if there are ways things could go where you eat breakfast and ways things could go where you don't, a truth would be arbitrary here. But if you just kind of say, but like, I admit the first thing, that there are these, you know, ways, but I just know that I will. I'm like, well, wait. I mean, that you haven't really addressed my contention here. I mean, you know, the skeptic might have a similar feeling about Moore, but you know, never mind. Yeah, but I mean, more broadly though, I think that the thing to say is that actually, once you start priming the thought that, like, look, no, it really is objectively possible. Like, there really are, you know, continuations of the present moment where I don't eat breakfast. I'm insisting on that. Like, you know, really could happen that, you know, I die of a heart attack or whatever else. As soon as you start doing that, you're going to notice that your confidence that you know that you'll have breakfast starts to wane. And so it's at least not as outlandish to say that actually, you know, future contingents are unknowable. But yeah, like what I mean, the kind of point that I want to insist on is that I do think future contingents are unknowable. That's because they're not true. It's not because like there's some special, you know, like skeptical worry about future contingents. Like this is a bit of a difficult point to get across quickly, but it's just the lack of truth that motivates my skepticism here, not something like skepticism more generally about the world.
Yeah. And for the audience, I was sort of setting up the skeptical thing just to kind of explain the Moorean shift type response, and I don't want to pin you into any kind of skeptical view or kind of tie it to skepticism more generally or any motivations pertaining to skepticism. Yeah. We're going to move on. I would resist that claim of question begging because I just think it's a comparison of plausibility judgments with respect to like the premises and the negation of the conclusion. And so, I mean, if someone really does find the negation of the conclusion more plausible, and it's hard to see how then they'd be like question begging. I mean, they're just kind of following their own plausibility structures and following the entailment relations from them. But I can see how someone who finds the premise is more plausible than the negation of the conclusion could kind of view that as a kind of non-successful response. You know, I could see that. And this is where philosophical dialectic gets difficult because people have different plausibility structures often. So I can basically understand where your question begging allegation is coming from. That's what I want to say, even though I disagree ultimately that it's question begging. That's what I want to say. Okay, good. Okay. The final objection to the grounding problem, which I really want to cover because it's fun, and then we'll cover the logical problem, and then maybe one practical problem. So then we'll get into that. But here's the final objection to the grounding problem, and it is from counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, or CCFs. And I call it a companions in innocence style argument, although anytime there's a companions in innocence thing, people can just say it's a companions in guilt. And this comes with this is exactly like the Moorean shift, like one's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. Okay, anyway, here's the objection, people. Okay, counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, or CCFs for short, are claims of the form, if an agent were in certain circumstances, then that agent would freely perform a certain action. So, for instance, if Patrick were to be offered half of my delicious sandwich, he would freely accept my offer. That's a counterfactual of creaturely freedom claim. Now, CCFs are contingent. If a given CCF is true, it's contingently true, and if it's false, it's contingently false, since CCFs report what agents would freely do or not do. And let's suppose let's suppose that we're working with a conception of freedom that requires leeway among alternative possible courses of action. Under those assumptions, CCFs are going to be contingent. But one might think that it seems obvious that at least some CCFs are true. One might think that reflection on many ordinary cases reveals this. Like, it seems really plausible that, like, if Donald Trump were offered $1,000, he would freely take it. I mean, you might say, oh, well, given his psychological disposition, he's determined and so on. But anyway, we don't need to get into those things. You might just think, reflection on ordinary cases, we very often say things like, oh, yeah, if Joe were in this situation, he would definitely do that. And we oftentimes make those claims with respect to free decisions and free choices. So, I would just say many people think that it's obvious that at least some CCFs are true. But here's the crucial part of my objection to your grounding argument. It seems that if your grounding argument succeeds in showing that there are no future contingent truths, then would also succeed in showing that there are no true CCFs. After all, CCFs are like future contingents in so many ways, right? Future contingents are about what's not actual, given no futurism. And the same is true of CCFs, right? Since they're counterfactuals, they're not about what's actually the case. Furthermore, because the CCFs are contingent facts about what an agent would freely do, all the same circumstances and features of the agent specified by the CCF could obtain, while the agent nevertheless chooses differently than how the CCF specifies that the agent would choose, right? And so there's precisely the sort of openness present here, as there is in the case of future contingents. So just as the present and the laws don't determine a unique future, and so leave elements of the future open, features of the agent and the relevant circumstances don't determine a unique free choice, and so leave the free choice open. In the case of future contingents, right, it's precisely because future contingents are, one, about what's not actual, and two, aren't determined by anything actual, that three, nothing could ground their truth, that is, they'd be arbitrary. And yet the exact same thing, one might think, is true of CCFs, and so by parity of reasoning, nothing could ground their truth, that is, they'd be arbitrary. And intuitively, CCFs are in just as much need of grounding as future contingents, for the former are derivative from more basic features of the agent and the relevant counterfactual circumstance, right? Like, just as the future is derivative from the present and the laws, right? I mean, you might think it's partly because of the circumstances and partly because of the agent's characteristics that the agent freely chooses as she does. So it's kind of, you got the derivativeness there as well. So all of this is just to say that there seems to be a kind of total parity here in my mind, or a total symmetry here. Just as with future contingent truths, true CCFs seem to be in need of grounding that they nevertheless cannot have. And hence there can be no true CCFs, at least if we follow your argument that there can be no true future contingents. But to many people that seems absurd. And so your argument, and so my argument here for the CCFs, there being no true CCFs, must have gone wrong somewhere. And by parity of reasoning, you too must have gone wrong somewhere. Okay, so for the audience, the argument here that I'm developing is that premise one, if your grounding argument against future contingent truths succeeds, then it would also succeed in showing that there are no true CCFs. Premise two, but your argument does not succeed in showing that there are no true CCFs, since there are true CCFs. Conclusion three, so your grounding argument against future contingent truths does not succeed. Okay. I'm not dogmatically wedded to this argument. I don't know if it succeeds, etc. But what do you make of this kind of companions in innocence style objection?
Nice. Well, I think my first pass response is to insist on exactly the comparison that you're developing here, that there's a strong argument that there's at least a kind of semantic similarity between will and would. Joe would have come to the party and Joe will come from the party. You might say these are kind of different sides of the same coin, so to speak. But more generally, I think, yeah, I mean, what you call a companion in innocence, I call a companion in guilt. I mean, I would just want to say, it seems very plausible to me that there's no fact of the matter about what someone would have freely done in a given circumstance of choice if you emphasize that freely in the right kind of way. If you have an indeterministic necessary condition on freedom. I mean, I think it's a little bit easier to just think about like indeterministic coins, so suppose I have a coin here and I didn't flip it, yesterday at noon. Well, had I flipped it yesterday at noon, which way would it have landed? Heads or tails? I mean, at some level, I think there's just no fact of the matter here. It would be very weird if there was just some fact, written into the universe about, to the effect that, oh yeah, I would have landed heads. That strikes me as super weird. Now, notably, I'm not the only one here. I mean, lots of people in the literature on counterfactuals, these are so-called counterfactuals, think, yeah, I mean, this is arbitrary, so we've got to deny that there are these types of true CCFs in the first place. So, yeah, I kind of want to say CCFs are, sure, they're at least as in need of grounding as future contingents, but I just think it's totally respectable view to deny that there are true CCFs.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so let's move on to the logical problem, and I know we'll have to be a little bit briefer with these problems. That's okay. So for the logical problem, maybe you could just give the audience a sense of like, let's just talk about your semantics for will and how it relates to neg-raising. So can you basically just explain your semantics of will, just briefly, on which will is a universal quantifier over available branches of the future? And then maybe just talk about briefly how that relates to neg-raising, and I won't interact further with it because I'd like to get on to maybe one practical problem. So before we end. So I'll just turn it over to you to talk about your semantics plus neg-raising, just if you could explain those.
Yeah, good. So, I mean, this might interest people who kind of want to hear the story of like, how do you defend yourself against this kind of charge of logical incoherence that, if it's false that I'll do this tomorrow, then surely I won't do this tomorrow. Okay, so I mean, the long story short here is that I developed a kind of account of the meaning of will. Like, if we say Joe will, be at the party, or there will be a sea battle tomorrow, or the weather next week will be fantastic. All these claims involve a will. We could say the same thing about be going to, but I'll just focus on will for now. So I think what's neat is we got to kind of give an account of the meaning of this expression. Well, let's just think about some other examples for a second. So consider, he may do it, he should do it, he must do it, he can do it. Okay, and then consider he will do it. Well, okay. My first point is that the final thing is semantically similar to the first things. Like, it's similar to he may do it, he should do it, he must do it. And these are sometimes called modals. So again, I'm not the first to notice this. I mean, lots of people in linguistics literature have said that will is a modal. But what does that mean? Well, basically, what does he may do it mean? That means something like there's some morally okay scenario where he does it. Like he's allowed to do it. He may do it. That means there's some scenario where which is okay where he does it. Contrast that with he must do it. That means in every acceptable scenario he does it. So it's kind of like these expressions either mean some or all. They're kind of saying some of the relevant possibilities are like this, or they mean all of the relevant ones are like this. Okay, so now let's ask about will. The kind of idea that I'm working with is that when we say he will do it, cutting some corners, this is going to say in all of a certain kind of scenario, feature-oriented scenario, he does it. Like Joe will have breakfast tomorrow. That's to say that all of a certain kind of future scenario is one where he has breakfast. Okay, so the kind of idea is that if the future is open, then it's going to turn out that all of these claims are false. But I mean, maybe we could just pause for a second and just say that that's the kind of first pass idea about the semantics of will. On my view, will is a modal that expresses universal quantification over all the what I call available futures, which are the features that are consistent with the present and the laws, and the future directed facts. So if you remember from earlier, we were talking about these, maybe there are these like properties that like being going to be there, being going to contain a sea battle or something like that. Well, those would be future directed, like primitive future directed properties. So will, I'm saying, is a universal quantifier over all of the causally possible futures, all the ones that could happen given the laws of nature, together with any of those future directed properties. So the kind of idea here then is that if the future is open in the right way, then there are none of these future directed facts or properties in the first place. And so in this case, then, Joe will do that tomorrow. That would be saying in every causally possible world, which is consistent with the future directed facts, he does that. And then, well, look, I mean, we could discard this idea that there are the future directed facts. So then it just boils down to the idea that in every way things could go, Joe does this. So it's just a matter of now whether this event is determined. And so in this kind of way, it's going to turn out that future contingents are false. But I mean, more generally, the kind of picture here is that once you actually give a careful semantic story about will, you'll see that it's a very natural view to just think that these claims are false.
Yeah, and just briefly how that relates to neg-raising. So for the audience, neg-raising is basically when we kind of take a wide scope negation. So scope is where a quantified expression or where a modal occurs in a sentence. So consider the claim that every person has some mother. That's saying that every takes wide scope. Every person is such that that person has some mother. And so the sum takes a narrow scope because it's within the purview of the wider quantifier. And so then you can invert these so that, there is some mother of every person. That's saying that there is some mother humanity of all people. So then that's another way where you can have like quantifiers changing position in a sentence. And neg-raising is basically when you take it is not the case that, and then you have another quantifier here. And then you basically just like invert them so that it is not the case that takes a narrow scope rather than the wide scope. So here are some examples. As an agnostic, this comes up all the time for me. I might say, if someone asks, hey, do you believe in God? And I say, it is not the case that I believe in God. Many people hear that as, I believe that there is no God, right? But I didn't say that. I said, it is not the case that I believe in God, right? So that it is not the case that takes the wide scope there, and then I believe that takes the narrow scope. So I'm just saying it's not the case that I believe that. I'm not saying I believe that it's false, right? I'm not saying I believe that it is not the case that God exists. But a lot of people kind of take that wide scope negation and put it within the narrow scope. So here are some examples like, I don't think that P versus I think that it's not the case that P, or no one should do something. It's like it is not the case that anyone should do something versus everyone shouldn't do that thing. Another example is I don't want to do that versus I want not to do that, right? So there's a distinction there. It might just be not the case that I want to do it, but maybe I have no desires whatsoever on the matter. And so it's not the case that I want to do it. But a lot of people hear that as, oh, well, I want not to do it. Like I desire not to do that thing. And so I do have a desire on that thing. So anyway, there are lots of these examples of neg-raising, and that relates to what you said because you've developed a view on which it will be the case that is a universal quantifier. So you're basically saying all available futures are such that P or something like that. And so if someone says it is not the case that it will be the case that P, under your account, that's saying it is not the case that under all available branches, P. But that doesn't mean that all available branches are such that not P is true in those available branches. Right. It might just be that some available branches are such that P and other available branches are such that not P. And in that case, you have, under your account, it is, you have the following truth. It is not the case that it will be the case that P. It doesn't follow on your account the following claim. It will be the case that it is not the case that P, right? Yeah. Because that's saying that under all of those available branches, not P is true. It populates all of them. And so you basically debar the inference that I was talking about earlier from it's not the case that I will eat breakfast tomorrow. You don't then get to infer that I will not eat breakfast tomorrow. It will be the case that I don't eat breakfast tomorrow. The former is compatible with there being some branches in which I eat breakfast and there being other branches in which I don't. Whereas the latter is saying, no, actually, under all available branches, I don't eat breakfast.
Yeah.
And the latter doesn't follow from the former. So anyway, that's my brief little rendition. If you want to add anything to that.
Well, yeah, I think that that's right. I think that the neg-raising literature shows that it's a relatively common phenomenon that there are certain contexts in which like important scope distinctions get masked or blurred or sort of ignored. So like, yeah, if someone says, you know, do you want to go to the party? And I'm like, no, I don't want to go to your stupid party. I mean, that's going to reliably convey that I want to refrain from going to your party. But strictly speaking, I mean, semantically, like that Patrick doesn't want to go doesn't entail that Patrick wants to not go. Or if you say like, hey, do you think Trump's a good president? I'm like, I don't think Trump's a good president. You know, that's going to reliably convey that I think Trump is not a good president. But of course, it doesn't entail that. And your agnostic case is a good case of bringing this out. The kind of controversial bit is going to be whether that same type of mechanism or that same type of story can be applied to the case of will. And I mean, there are linguistic complications here, but by and large, I think something like the model that explains what's going on in the belief case and the think case and the wants case is explaining what's going on in the will case. Maybe there are some differences that are worth picking up on, but broadly speaking, it's the same type of mechanism. It's that, look, I mean, we're usually in a context in which we're assuming that there's some one feature which is ours. You know, it's like we're not really thinking like open futurists. And so when someone says it's not going to happen, like it's it's false that that will happen, we're just immediately assuming that, well, I mean, there's some one feature which is ours. And so either every way things could go is one where it happens, or every way things could go is one where it doesn't. And so when they deny the first thing, that sort of conveys the second. So yeah, it's kind of like that. It's like when I say, oh, that's like he's going to do that. I'm like, that's false. That's going to convey that he won't do it, but I think strictly speaking, it doesn't entail it. I think that this neg-raising issue is really, if not the letter of neg-raising, I mean, that's a kind of term from linguistics, but broadly speaking, the mechanisms that are explored in that literature, that's really the key, I think, to the open future. And it's something that I hope is distinctive about the approach that I've developed in this book.
Yeah, so that's why I'm glad we got to cover that. So unfortunately, we won't be able to cover the practical problems, but that's all the more reason for you guys to enter this giveaway that I'm about to describe. So yeah, anyway, Dr. Todd goes through a bunch of different practical problems in his book, from betting, from probabilistic judgments about future contingents, to practical problems about retroclosure and assertion. But we're not going to go over any of that here. If we had another hour, we would, but alas, we do not. So yeah, anyway, check out the book for those interested in these practical problems and how someone who adopts Dr. Todd's view can address those. Yeah, anyway, here is the info for the giveaway. Basically, in order to win a book for free, all you have to do is share this video on social media. That's basically all you have to do. Now, there are some other things you have to do, but that's the basic thrust of it. What you have to do to enter the giveaway is to send a screenshot proof that you shared the video on social media to my email address, which is majestyofreason@gmail.com. I'll then collect all the names and record a video of me choosing 2 names from a hat at random, and then I'll then send the video to everyone who entered, and I'll collect each winner's mailing address and whatnot. A few caveats on that: retweets don't count. You actually have to be the one who makes the post. So like clicking retweet or reshare, that does not count. You have to kind of do it yourself. And also, don't post it on social media and then delete it and then take a screenshot, but then delete it like 2 seconds later. So that's also another thing that doesn't count. It has to be a genuine share, spread the love of the Majesty of Reason. That's the whole purpose of this. And also spread the good news of Patrick Todd's book, because it's an excellent book. So that's the whole purpose of this. It's to spread the good news, basically. I will confirm receipt of your email by replying with one word, something like thanks. And then the contest ends in 5 days, with today being the first. So share the video and email me sooner rather than later. Thank you guys all for your support and for sharing these videos. As a reminder, finally, to the audience, there's a link in the description to purchase Dr. Todd's book, The Open Future: Why Future Contingents Are All False. I've also linked Dr. Todd's website so you can check out his other work. And yeah, thank you, Patrick, for coming on. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much, Joe. It was super fun. All the better that maybe we didn't get to the hard practical problems from my view. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation and looking forward to hearing more.
Awesome. And what better way to end is there than I'm Joe Schmid. This is The Majesty of Reason, and peace out.